Alright, in this video we are going to cover another way to do hard surface sculpting or modeling. And this one came a little bit later in ZBrush, I think 2018 I think it came in. This is called Project Primitive. It's really powerful, but it does have a learning curve. It looks confusing. But I think you could see that it has a lot of power once we kind of get into it. So let's start with a cube. So I'm going to turn this into a Dynamesh because I believe that is the requirement. So let's do 512. Actually, let's do delete lower first and Dynamesh 512. That might be too high. Ooh, that's really high. Let's do 256. Okay, that's pretty good. Right now it's at 387. I suppose we could go 1.5 million polys. It's pretty good. So Project Primitive is in a weird spot. It is in the Move Translate widget. So if you hit W, like you're gonna move it, which, you know, that's kind of what we use. We're basically going to add, what Project Primitive does is it adds shapes to this model in real time and allows you to manipulate them, and they can act as booleans or additions, but it is going to be a little bit of a learning curve. So to get into Project Primitive, you want to be in the Move or Translation widget and go into Customize, which is the gear, and it's down here. Now, you could do all this stuff to this model, almost like modifiers. You know, you can bend it, flatten it. But the one we want is Project Primitive. So we turn that on. You can see we got a lot of weird stuff happening right here. And what we're going to focus on is where that Move widget is down here. There's something inside of it, and it is a shape. Now we'll go through what all these things mean. You can highlight each one, because I don't remember all of them. Each time you highlight one of these little colored cones, they tell you what its function is. So it looks confusing. You're like, you know, what the hell is all this stuff? But really, if you just don't rush and you just highlight everything before you do it, it's going to tell you what each cone does. So right now, we're no longer influencing or addressing the cube itself. It's what is inside of the cube. So let's just see what we have by taking the translation and moving it up. You can see we have a sphere. It starts out as a sphere. You can see it's already like embedded in there, which is nice. And while we're here, we can do things like scale it, move it up. If you go too far, it goes in a different direction as a boolean. So at a certain point, it kind of pops in, and becomes a nice hole. So this is a nice quick way, quick way to start making holes and divots. If I move it out like this, at a certain point, it folds in on itself. And again, it's like a live boolean. Do that. I'm going to get out of perspective. So if this is the front of the model, so right now it's looking a little weird, and then when you go at a certain point, it kind of turns into a different function. So what does everything do? So that's just basic, you know, move around with what you start with. I think it always starts with a sphere. So if you had started with a sphere, it would be a sphere on a sphere. Right now it's a cube on a sphere on a cube. So let's go with some of the other functions here. So we'll look at the ones that are covering the sphere itself. So we have, if we say primitive type, that's the next cone up. It's the yellow one. If I turn it and pull it up, you can see it changed it to a cylinder. And the cylinder looks weird, but it's because we haven't done anything to it yet. Let's go back to the sphere. Before we change it, I forgot to mention, see these little, on the move widget, you have these little dots. If I click and hold it, you can actually flatten a side, pull it in. Same thing on the top if I wanted to. So let's change the, let's go back to changing the primitive type to a cylinder. And then the next one would be the modifier. So you can see how it changes it here like this. And then the next one up is another modifier. So this is how you could potentially turn, if we went back to sphere and we change the modifier, we can start to turn it into a cube. So on here, there's also a blend, which basically says how it blends into this cube. So if I pull that up more, it blends it in as much as possible. If I pull it the other way, it's almost like as if it was two different things. So if we had it blend, and then we went to new surface, it makes it kind of like a separate piece. Now this last button is to accept it. So if we were done with it, we would kind of click on the white cone. Let's look at the other stuff though. So tessellate, giving it more resolution, maximum displacement, and then over here, these are symmetries. So if I wanted it a radial symmetry, or Z symmetry, or X symmetry, or Y symmetry, see now it's down the bottom. So now everything I do will be for both of them. So if I come in here and say tessellate, it's going to tessellate both of them. If I change the displacement value. So between all the different cones, you can get like some really neat shapes here, like the modifier. So if I'm done, and I want to add a new shape to it, I'm going to hit accept. So now what that does is it brings, it kind of commits that one, and now I have a new one. And it's always going to be the last of what I just had. But if you come here under the gear and click reset, it brings it back to its last form. Or you could do full reset, and it will bring it back to like kind of when you first started, which would be the sphere. So if you want to keep it as the last tool, or the last thing that you made, you can just do a reset. But if you want to kind of start from scratch here, again, you can play with modifiers, and you can just keep doing it. So commit, it kind of just continues on and on. So I have this here like this. But I want to pop it on the other side. Do symmetry. It's X. There it is. Ugh. It's so slow that it's hard to actually make it work. There we go. Now, once you've committed, one of these other ones, you can't go back. It's not there anymore. But that's just something you have to get used to. This is kind of it's destructive and non-destructive, so it's non-destructive until you kind of commit it, and then it is then destructive because if I say, for example, that I realize that this was not centered the way I wanted it to be, or this one is, or this was the wrong shape, I wanted a different shape, you're kind of out of luck there. If I'm done, I can just say accept, and it brings me out of that and back into traditional ZBrush. If we look at the wireframe, we do have polygroups, so we can hide some of these pieces. So there's potential to kind of separate them into their own if you needed it, but it's worth messing around in. I wouldn't really put it in your pipeline right away. I would take some time with it and really see what you could get out of it. I did a lot of things with it prior. At least used it to really quickly get like a very base shape of the thing that I wanted to do, and then get in there, kind of bring it back to this point and go in and sculpt and do other stuff. But I did use it. It is cool. It takes a little bit of time, but I do recommend messing around in there and getting it. But if you get too frustrated, again, I wouldn't use it as this is how I'm going to get something done right away until you actually know the tools better, because I think you could use anything else that we've done before and get something nice and done quicker. But if you spend enough time in here, I can imagine you being able to get something quickly and efficiently. So, okay, that is Project Primitive.